Zach, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Chris.
Good to see you. Super excited, and to do it live is so much fun.
Yes.
So driving in to see me, and so why don't we take you back before you joined Student Works, or at the time Student Painters?
Yep.
You know, who was Zack Kembar? Who were you before the program?
So before the program, I was at Western.
Yeah.
I was, let's see, first year. I was in arts. I wanted to go into business.
Yeah.
I had a good friend, Dave Fear,
Okay, Dave.
who was looking at the program, talked to me about it. And I had been working in a variety of different things before. I had been a bartender. I'd been a short order cook.
Right.
I worked in a lumber yard. I had done some manual labor. I'd done a whole bunch of different stuff. And then I had done a few Joe jobs here and there on farms.
Right.
But I hadn't really done anything organized. And I really wanted to get into business, but I really didn't know what that was.
Right.
Because I didn't have any background. My parents weren't business people. And so I was a little bit all over the place. I was taking English and history and business and economics, kind of general arts course at school. I wasn't very focused. I was partying a lot. And I thought, you know, I should probably hunker down and get a little bit more serious. And then Dave introduced me to the program, and then I started to focus on it. It started to get real very, very quick.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Well, it's funny you bring up Dave Fear. Dave's now, you know, well, he's not now. He's been remarkably successful. You know. Hedge fund manager, managing, you know, just extraordinary career. And he had an extraordinary summer with us.
Yeah.
I know that summer was exciting. I know, and thinking back on it, we got to work together.
Yeah.
So that was super fun. And so, you know, what was that experience like for you? You know, running your own business and expanding yourself, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I think the most interesting thing really was the pre-summer training. I had never really done anything like that before. And it was really exciting to kind of get together with a bunch of other students that were all in the same boat. And you were thrown into this big room. There was a really organized training program, which I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
There were some interesting speeches. There were some really impressive people. You were learning time management skills, sales skills, how to organize yourself, a lot of interesting things that were integral to kind of getting you ready for the summer.
Yeah.
And then, you know, things like you had to buy a car, you had to buy equipment.
Yeah.
You had to kind of organize yourself, get business cards.
Yeah.
And then when I went out with you to do estimates, that was totally new. You had to knock on doors, you know, talk to people that you didn't know.
Yeah.
and it's really freaky, like cold calling people and asking to talk to them about painting their house. So sort of all of that was very new, and very exciting, but also a lot of hard work. It was incredibly difficult to, you know, balance school with, you know, almost a full-time job starting in kind of April, May.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and again, even more so when somebody is super, super energetic, which you were and are, or mostly have been all your life. You're someone, I always like to say you know, most people that we attract to our business are just people with huge engines, and it's about how to turn them off, you know, because we're just so, you know, driven.
Well, you have to have a lot of energy. I think that starting your own business is really, really hard, and doing well at it. Not just getting the sales right, but also, you know, the people skills, watching the numbers, actually making money.
Yes.
Which I had a problem with my first year. I had big sales, but my, you know, margins were thin because I was underpricing my work.
Right. Yeah.
So that's why I was winning all the jobs. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you learn that.
Yeah. No, and one of the cool things now with technology and systems and CRMs, we've just gotten so much better at that and making sure that doesn't happen. And on the other hand, there are lessons. Like one of the things when you're running a business, you're going to learn, and sometimes as well, those things that we, those mistakes are great lessons, though, so that we don't do them again. So, but if you think back to that time at Student Works, what did you use during your career? What, you know, et cetera? What are you still using?
So I think one of the things that was very memorable was those little time books.
Yes.
What were they called?
Day timers.
Day timers.
Yeah.
So we were given day timers, and we had this whole time management system.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me a little bit silly at the beginning. And then as you got into it and you got really, really busy,
Yeah.
you had to put stuff into your
Yes.
your time management system, your day timer.
Yeah.
And it kind of ruled your life.
Yes.
But that was integral to getting everything scheduled.
Yes.
You know, whether you were meeting customers, you were doing estimates, you were going to get your, paint in the morning, you were, recruiting new painters, you were cleaning up a spill or whatever you were doing. You really had to schedule yourself, because if you didn't, you got way behind and you were just underwater all the time.
Exactly.
So I think the day timer was a big one, which got into scheduling and the importance of scheduling and the importance of kind of focusing on staying on top of stuff.
Yes.
And then with the day timer was also the kind of goal setting, getting stuff done, where, sort of short-term urgent stuff versus kind of long-term important.
Yeah.
Kind of the quadrants, the 4 quadrants, like, urgent, important, and then not urgent, not important.
Yes.
And sort of prioritizing your time. I think those were really big things that I took away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so coming out of Western, graduated from an arts degree, but having this real business experience, what were you thinking of? What was next for Zack?
So when I was at Western, I started off taking business courses, and they were really boring.
Okay.
And I didn't really love it. But I did like working in the summer, and I liked the concept of business. I just wasn't sure kind of what it was going to look like. And the courses at school were not very interesting. And so I started reading a lot more about stock markets, trading. I had read some books. I did a lot of reading, and I was really interested in it, but I didn't have the qualifications for it.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a summer job in Toronto in investment banking credit.
Okay.
And it was a good job, but it wasn't for me.
Right.
It was really boring.
Okay.
And so I thought, okay, I really don't want to do this.
Right.
I would like to do something else where I'm interacting with customers.
Yes.
I'm doing something that's a little bit more transactional, a little bit more sales and tradey.
Yes.
And so I was reading the Globe one day. I was sitting at my desk, very bored.
Yeah.
I was reading the Globe, and there was a really interesting article about these guys that were working in Japan.
Okay.
And I called the reporter on the story because I had never heard about this before. And he had been in Japan interviewing these Canadian guys, talking about, what was happening, expats in Japan. And it sounded fascinating. Right. And so one of my fraternity brothers, Rory, his sister was living in Japan. And, I didn't have, any job prospects other than my credit analyst job, which I didn't want to do. Right. And it was I think 91 sort of summer, fall. Right. And it was a recession. There were no jobs. Right. I mean, if you were a genius, there were jobs, but I wasn't. I had terrible marks. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do here? I'm going to go over to Japan. I'm going to travel. Maybe I can talk to these guys, network a little bit, and see if I can get a job over there. Right. So that's what I did. I went over to Japan, and I started learning Japanese, got a part-time job, started networking with the Canadian community and some of the others that I knew, and worked really hard to kind of get into a good situation where I could get a job. Right, right.
So what's really neat is that the things that people won't do, and the things that people will do. So Zack, really fascinating. Do you know what you can do? You can call reporters. You know what you can do? There's a business there, and you want to start a business. You can call the CEO of that business or the CFO or whomever, and you can talk to people. And then that's what Zack learned to do in our business, because when you learn to canvas and cold call people, you can talk to anyone.
Yeah. One of the things was, you need to be able to put yourself into uncomfortable situations.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think you taught me that as we went to a couple of estimates early on, and you would put the pen in front of this woman or man and say, if you're comfortable with this, please sign here. Right. And ask for the sale. And it's very uncomfortable. And, things like uncomfortable silences, listening, and then the uncomfortable silence. So putting yourself into situations where you can see the end,
Yeah.
but you got a lot of tough steps to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So really, and then let's go halfway across the world. So that's a pretty big step, Zach.
Well, I wanted to travel.
So you kind of put two things together.
Yeah.
So you weren't putting everything on it, and it's not like, wow, you didn't have a place to go home to. So these were rational steps, right?
Yeah.
But then tell me about, because I've heard, of course, but tell me about, so what happened and how did you start meeting people in finance?
So there were a couple of Canadian guys that I met who were working as brokers in Tokyo.
Right.
Really nice guys. One of them is still working in finance. The other one is, I think, either the ambassador to Japan now or in the government, linked to Japan.
Wow.
Really nice guys. So I met with them, asked them a lot of questions. I did a lot of kind of information interviews where they would introduce me to friends of theirs. I would go kind of learn what they were doing, think about whether that was interesting, and then kind of follow up. And I did that quite a bit. And I ended up meeting a really nice Canadian guy, Jeff Fraley, I think his name was. And he had done an internship or an exchange program with a Japanese trading company. Mm-hmm. And he was leaving.
Right.
And so he said, why don't I talk to these guys and maybe you can work for them?
Wow.
And so I got a really nice introduction to a trading company called Nichimen in their precious metals division. And I got to kind of sit with them on a trading floor and learn a little bit about metals trading, but also learn a lot of Japanese. I lived in a company dormitory for 2 years.
Wow.
And I learned a lot of interesting stuff. And that gave me the kind of platform to interview with foreign companies, which eventually led to some, really interesting opportunities.
Right. So one of the other unique situations that you had is going to Japan, you learn Japanese, all of a sudden you're a amazing, communicator in English, you're learning some Japanese, people feel really comfortable, I imagine, in the future that you've got both of these capabilities.
Yeah, the Japanese was helpful. I did a homestay with a family soon after I got there, which was great. I didn't have fluent Japanese, but it was good enough that I could trade in Japanese. I could do numbers very quickly. I could have, reasonably good conversations, but it wasn't like I could read the paper or I could carry on a difficult conversation. That was sort of beyond me.
For sure.
And I had done the sort of work that to get to that level would be really difficult. And I just didn't have the bandwidth at that time to really power and do it. I wanted to start working and making money.
For sure.
Because I was totally broke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got that one job, you got started, again, you're networking, you're using your relationship capabilities to network. And then what was next?
So I met some guys that were working at Merrill Lynch, and they were looking for people that could do execution very quickly in futures and options, and talk to hedge fund guys who were, let's say, really spicy and very aggressive, and very difficult to deal with. I had been a bartender in one of my summer jobs, and that meant that you needed to do very fast, simple math in your head. You had to kind of prioritize customers. You had to think about a lot of orders at once, and you had to work really quickly.
Right.
And that experience actually was really good for this first kind of job I had with a foreign company at Merrill Lynch, where I was working on the options and futures execution desk in Tokyo, doing a lot of futures and options trading, and on behalf of customers.
Right.
I turned out to be pretty good at it, so it worked out really well. And then I got recruited to.
Let's pause there.
Yeah.
So what makes you good at doing that? And does that job exist anymore? Do they do it differently?
So it doesn't really exist the same way it did back then. Back then, the technology was such that someone sitting in the U.S. could not trade electronically futures and options with Tokyo directly or with Singapore directly, where there were two futures contracts, one traded in Singapore, the other traded in Tokyo. So they would need to get on the phone and call the broker in the country.
Right.
And they didn't want to talk to a local Japanese person because there were cultural differences, there were language problems, and they just got frustrated.
Right.
And so they needed to speak to a foreigner.
Right.
And so there was a real need for foreign speakers in Tokyo at that time because the markets were booming. And there's a lot of stuff going on. And so I was kind of lucky. I was kind of in the right place at the right time, but the experience that I had before helped me with that job, because a lot of people got very panicky doing it and couldn't do it because they weren't able to kind of multitask and prioritize.
Yeah.
And I kind of had that a little bit. And so it was easier for me to do and maintain the kind of momentum through the day, because it was pretty intense during the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what was next?
So I did that for about a year, and during the year I got recruited internally to be a sort of junior trader for a senior guy in London who was running a big warrant book. And I didn't get a lot of great training. He was a very talented guy, but I didn't get a lot of great training, and I didn't really understand what I was doing.
Right.
And so he had this strategy that in previous years had worked out well, and then it started going very wrong.
Oh.
And so he was losing a lot of money. Every day he was losing tons of money on the book that he had. He was long Japanese warrants and he was short futures against it. And there was a huge tracking error to what he was doing. And there were liquidity problems with the underlying warrants. And I was kind of lost during the day, because I would talk to him when he got up in the London morning. And then when he got up, he would give me all these orders and we would talk. But there was, big periods of the day where I didn't have a lot of direction.
Right.
And I wasn't enough of a self-starter at that point where I could really just kind of figure it out.
Right.
And so I was kind of floundering a little bit there. And so I got into talking to a friend of mine who was working for another firm, and he recruited me to do something called sales trading, which was similar to what I'd been doing, but it was more stock focused and away from the derivatives. And so I worked for UBS for a year doing the sales trading in Japanese stocks and convertible bonds. And I was pretty good at that. And then I had met socially playing rugby and some other stuff, some guys at Goldman, and they were really nice guys. And they said, well, why don't you come and work for us?
Right.
And I was thinking, well, I'm working at UBS. I like it here, but I don't love it, but I'm learning a lot, and it's going pretty well. And I didn't think I could get a job at Goldman. It's Goldman.
It's Goldman.
Really,
exactly.
really hard.
That's right.
And they said, come on, you should try. We've got a good team and we want to build it up, and we hear good things. And so I had some pretty good customer relationships, and I think I was doing pretty well at UBS. But again, I was still pretty young. So I did like 22, 23 interviews at Goldman.
23 interviews it was
really
at
hard.
Goldman.
It was really hard. And some of the interviews I did in Japanese. Some were, people were quite unpleasant, but most of them were really good. And people at Goldman were generally really, really professional, very good. But some were, not very good.
And sometimes that is the way in the financial industry, right? Yes.
So I got through my 23 interviews, and I was thinking, I really don't know if I'm going to get this job. And then I ended up getting the job, and it was great. And Goldman was wonderful, because at that time in 1996, they they still do, I think now, but they had a really, really good training program.
Okay.
So when I joined as what's called an associate. So it's kind of one level above an analyst.
Right.
And Goldman in the past had generally only hired, in the early days, they hired like really young people right out of university as analysts. Then they started to hire what they called associates, either from an MBA class or people who'd had previous experience and were called like lateral hires from other firms. Yeah. And so I did I did a lateral hire training program, and I think there were about 80 people in my training program from all over the world. We went to New York. I was there for a couple months, and it was just a blast.
Wow.
Really interesting. Very similar to student painters in the sense that very organized, systematic, lots of different things, sales skills, organization, learning about the the organization, meeting clients. It was very exciting. Really, really good. Very professional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then why don't you walk me through, like, what was your initial roles, like, initial capabilities, that sort of thing?
So initially I was on a team of sales traders, which is what I'd done before. Right. And the first thing I noticed when I got there was the technology versus where I was before was like night and day.
Oh, wow.
Night
Okay.
and day. The second thing I noticed was that the culture was totally different.
Okay.
Goldman was a place at that time which was owned by the partners. This was in the mid 90s. And so they had a stake in everything that was going on.
Right.
And if there were any big trades or any large transactions or big pieces of business that were happening, they were intimately involved. And if you had a problem or you had an opportunity, all you needed to do was like step 5 feet or 10 feet from your desk, and there was a senior trading partner right there.
Wow.
And you could talk to them.
Okay.
And that was very different from, where I was before. That was really cool. So I started off on the sales trading desk. I was talking to domestic and international clients, same kind of things, Japanese stocks, convertible bonds. And I did that for about 3 years and had a team of about 5 people.
Okay.
And we had really good growth in the business, very exciting. But at the end of 99, I'd been in Japan for almost 10 years.
And why don't we pause there?
Yeah.
So what was the value add there, Zach? How were you adding value to Goldman? How were you adding value to your customers, et cetera?
So a couple of things I think in the financial markets and kind of when you're doing transactional trading, but also when you're building client relationships in that kind of a job, a lot of the time you're speaking to people who are, either on the phone all day or on their computer all day. They might be bored. They might, be tired. A lot of the guys were night traders.
Okay.
And so you need to build rapport with them. You need to be able to engage. I'm not saying you need to be a storyteller and,
Sure.
just do weird stuff, but you needed to be able to listen, be empathetic, but also be able to transact very quickly and also give them information.
Right.
And so a lot of the job was dissemination of information, both financial information, but also kind of what was going on, in the room, in the city,
Right.
et cetera. Our analyst takes on different companies. So dissemination of information, but also having curiosity to do research, to do work, to talk to other clients, get other inputs, and then share that information with those clients.
Right.
So the sharing of information, the distilling of information into a coherent narrative, strategy,
yes,
et cetera, I think was very important. But also getting stuff done quickly.
Yeah.
That was a real value add, was getting stuff done really quickly and being able to relate to people on their level and talk to them and give them the information they needed and be off.
Right. And then, and how long did, I remember you became a VP. How long did that take? Or when did you?
So I started off as an associate. I was an associate, I think, for 2 years. And then I was maybe 2 or 3 years. And then I got to be a VP at the end of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But remember, there's a lot of VPs at Goldman.
A lot of VPs at Goldman. Okay. Great. So you still would have considered yourself senior though?
Yeah, I was getting more senior on my team, and then I got recruited. I felt like it was time to leave Japan.
Okay.
I had been there for almost 10 years. I had some very good friends.
Right.
Had made some great relationships, but the challenge was you would meet some new people, they would stay 2 or 3 years, and then they'd leave. Yeah. And people were always going home. And I kind of was getting a little homesick for the Western world, and I wanted a change. So I ended up getting recruited to go to London, and then to New York. And going to New York was really transformational because I had a really good boss, very charismatic Aussie guy, and he did derivatives. He had fantastic relationships. And I changed over from traditional kind of equity sales trading to derivative sales, which was very, very different. It was much more kind of cerebral. You had to use your head on a lot more stuff, more complicated, more sophisticated clients. Just everything was different. Right.
And so who are you with in New York?
Goldman as well.
Okay.
So I moved with them to New York, and I worked on the derivatives desk, and I had a really good team of people. We built our business up a lot over the next kind of 6 years.
Okay.
We were the #1 derivatives desk in the States for I think 3 years running.
Okay.
So we had a really, really good team, fantastic traders, great atmosphere.
Right.
It was just fantastic.
Yeah.
But the most important thing was I had a really good boss when I started.
Right.
He was just fantastic, very inspirational.
Right. And so who were your customers and how are you providing value?
Yeah, so similar to the original kind of stuff in Tokyo, you're adding value by giving them, really good information, also fast and in, I guess, concise pricing.
Right.
The other thing too with derivatives was kind of getting back to the bartending analogy, organizing customers, but also with the derivatives, there was another element that was really, really important, which was using the whole team
Right.
to create synergies where you had an initial order of something, and you were able to look kind of across different salespeople and different customers and think, okay, how is this, important to Chris's customer or John's customer or somebody else's? And from that one order, you were able to create something really big.
Okay.
And do multiple orders off of that.
Okay.
And so we created this really good flow business that was generating enormous volume, but it was also generating a lot of synergy, and it was helping the customers from a liquidity perspective, but also from a risk perspective. We had some customers on this side that were looking at debt and were worried about a company's debt, and were trying to figure out how to hedge that debt.
Okay.
And sometimes it was difficult to hedge it in the fixed income market, and sometimes they go to the equity market to hedge it, and they come to our desk. So we kind of needed to know what was happening in fixed income so that we could be smarter, faster, better at hedging and executing orders for the clients in the equity derivatives. And so we were one of the first firms to do what is called kind of cross-asset trading.
Okay.
Where Goldman was really smart. They brought over some credit salespeople from fixed income to sit right next to my group. And so I was sitting next to a credit salesperson, and I didn't know anything about credit when I started.
Right.
And he was sitting next to an equity person, and they were totally different. But we got to know each other. We got to learn about the products, and that wasn't happening at other firms as quickly and as fast.
Right.
In terms of the adoption.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are the kind of the value added things were kind of in summary, building up something from nothing,
Right.
or building up something big from a small thing, and then having the ability to look through the different layers of the asset classes to figure out what the best solution was for the client, and then executing on that.
Right. Right. What does the client need? How do I do that?
Yep.
And then the neat thing is a lot of the things, because of technology,
Yep.
and because once a company does something, other people then know
Yep.
they're doing it, and it becomes table stakes. Everyone's doing it.
That's right. So this became a very common thing later on.
Right.
But when I first started off, it was really difficult because I didn't know anything about these other areas.
Yeah.
And you had super sophisticated clients that were calling you up and saying, well, this is happening over here and this is happening over here. And you had to learn it.
Yes.
And I was way over my skis when I started. And
Okay.
my boss was getting frustrated. He's like, yo, you got to learn this. You got to learn this. And I wasn't a math person.
Right.
And all the guys that were sitting
just
around
math
me
quants.
were math quants.
Yeah.
And the traders were super smart in math. And I was pretty good at basic stuff.
Right.
But equity derivatives gets really complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what was that like, working in, Wall Street, hours, like on the trading desk, how much you're spending at night learning, et cetera?
Yeah. So a lot of people focus on kind of like, well, I work 60 hours a week or I work 90 hours a week. And okay, but I think, on a trading desk and on a trading floor, it's the intensity of the work when you're there.
Right.
So I had friends that were in investment banking or in other areas, and they might come in at 8 or 9 in the morning, and they'd go out for lunch, and they would do this and they would do that, and then they'd go through these periods where there wasn't much going on, and then they'd stay till 2 or 3 in the morning because someone called them at 8 for a project, right?
Right.
It's a very different kind of work than being on a trading floor where you're getting there at 7, you're pouring through all sorts of stuff, you're calling people, you're taking calls, you're getting shouted at by traders, you're getting shouted at by your colleagues, you're getting shouted at by clients.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're on two phones, you're looking at screens. You're doing a lot of stuff all day long from like 8 in the morning till 4 or 5.
Right.
And you can't leave the desk for lunch.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get off the desk.
Yes.
So you're really kind of jamming all day.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty intense.
Pretty intense.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to look at it. And I remember in one of our conversations in the past, you tell me that one of your clients in the past called during lunch, and you kind of stepped out for lunch, and he was like, "Don't ever do that," or "I'm not doing business with you," or something like that.
Well, sometimes like you especially in the mornings, you just couldn't leave the desk because there was so much going on. You didn't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
And people got pissed off. Like clients had very short fuses.
Yes.
And if you weren't at the desk, they just call another broker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't want that.
There was one client, I won't give you his last name.
Yeah.
We'll call him Tom. And I think I don't know, I'd had a hard night the night before, or I was lazy, or just, I wasn't on my game. And he said, "Zack, listen, I've got guys lighting their hair on fire for orders, so you better pick it up." I was like, okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was New York. And then did you move, or what happened next?
Yeah. So towards the end, when it was kind of 2006, I'd been at Goldman for 10 years, almost 11 years. And my boss had changed. It was getting a lot more kind of political. And I had realized that, there are several ways to advance there. But one of the challenges with Goldman was that, and one of the great things was that it's really a place that's populated by A-type people.
Yes.
And so you're constantly with A-type people all the time. And it does get tiring. And I figured, okay, I wasn't an amazing manager. Mm-hmm. I could see that because you get these reviews and stuff. I was pretty good at what I did, but I wasn't an amazing manager. So I wasn't really going to be on the manager track.
Right.
And I could continue doing what I was doing, but it was tiring and it was hard. And I wanted to learn new things. I was very curious. So I wanted to try something different. And then you could be a political person.
Right.
And I wasn't that.
Right.
So they were you were either really good, and that was hard because competing against people at Goldman was very tough.
So incredible.
You could be political, or you could be a manager type.
Yeah.
And I wasn't fitting in there.
Right.
So I got a great offer from another firm. I worked there for a year, and the first day I was there, I knew it was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But I had to stay a year.
Yeah.
I had to stay a year. And so I stayed out my year. I met some nice people, and I had an okay time, but it was really, really difficult to do what I had been doing at Goldman. For a variety.
Who was that with, and what work were you doing?
It was with Deutsche Bank.
Okay.
And Deutsche Bank was in many ways, Deutsche Bank was a good firm if you were in the right spot.
Okay.
And if you had the right boss. But Deutsche was a company that had kind of grown up, I will say, hiring people from other firms and not growing organically from within. Right. And because they were hiring lots of different people from lots of different firms, the culture was really weird.
Yes.
And so, they had a lot of people that, like me, were on a guarantee.
Yeah.
And so that was great for me monetarily, but from an experience standpoint and relationships with the traders, relationships with clients, it was really challenging.
Right.
Stuff that I could do at Goldman with traders, at a snap of a finger, was really difficult to do at Deutsche Bank, just because the traders worked very differently.
Right.
They were very siloed. They didn't talk to a lot of other people. There was none of this cross-asset stuff. It was really hard to get stuff done. And there were some really talented people there.
Right.
And super smart, great, but it just didn't have the cohesiveness and management and all the capabilities that Goldman did. So I was there for a year, and then I got recruited by BNP Paribas to go back to Tokyo and manage their derivatives business in Tokyo. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, I like what I'm hearing. I like the idea of going over, managing a business, going back to Japan. So I did that, and it was great. I had a great time at BNP, really good firm. Very interesting, very French,
Right.
which was good.
Yeah.
I used to get into work at Goldman at 7 in the morning. At BNP, I'd go in at 9.
Wow.
And it was great. It was really
culture.
good. Because they were very focused during the day.
Yeah.
They worked really hard. But they didn't see the need to come in at 7 in the morning.
Yeah.
There was less face time, but the people just weren't working at the same kind of intensity.
Yes.
Not that they were not as smart. It's just that they were working at a different pace. And it was a different firm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but very exciting, and it was great to get back to Japan. Although the second time around, I was with a kid, and I was with a young child and wife, which was very different.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends had gone, and Japan had changed. In the mid '90s, Japan was the center of finance in Asia, and by the time I went back in 2007, it was hollowed out to some degree to Singapore and Hong Kong.
Right.
It had lost a lot of ground.
Right.
Still a wonderful city, but just very different to work there.
Right. And you were the managing director?
Yeah. I was the managing director. I was in charge of equity derivative, what they called flow sales.
Right.
So similar to what I'd been doing at Goldman and at Deutsche, just with a different group and doing a lot more structured products, which was a lot of complicated math,
right,
which I had to learn again and really try to figure stuff out. That was really exciting. It was really cool.
Right. That's great. And so, and what had you coming home eventually was saying you wanted to come home.
Well, yeah, I had been in Asia for, 14, almost 14 years. I had been working in finance for, quite a while, and I wanted to come home to Canada.
Yeah.
I was kind of a little bit homesick. I wanted to do more outdoorsy stuff.
Yeah.
Wanted to ski, wanted to, go fishing, hunting, do all that kind of good Canadian stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard to do when you're overseas and when you're doing those kinds of jobs.
And exactly. When you're really owned by the job, because obviously you're being paid a whole lot of money. You're managing director, and there's an enormous amount of responsibility and responsibility. Yeah. And so you now are managing your own funds. What's been neat about that? What's been cool about that? What maybe are some interesting stories about that?
Yeah, so I during my let's say traditional finance career, when I was working at the various different firms, I was always pretty interested in investing my own money in different things, stocks, bonds, private equity, private debt, and had done some research, but wanted to do more, wanted to learn more about all the different asset classes. And as I started meeting more and different clients, I got more and more interested. And then when I decided I didn't want to, work in sort of the brokerage world anymore to the same degree, I kind of broke off and started doing a lot more research. So the curiosity that I had kind of built up in finance and doing a lot of reading, that put me on a good footing. When I was a kid, I didn't have a TV because we grew up on a farm in Ontario. So I had done a lot of reading, and I had the ability to really sit down and focus and read for long periods of time.
Okay.
And I was curious about lots of different things. So I was doing, I was reading about all sorts of different things.
Right.
And one of the tricky things with that was at the beginning, you have trouble self-regulating yourself because everything looks exciting. There's lots of glittery little jewels, and you want to chase everything. And that can really bite you in the ass.
Yes.
So, the discipline you learn from working on a trading desk in terms of, calling people back, focusing, being curious about things, those kinds of habits were great. But it was a totally different skill set when you had to kind of do your own thing. You had to sit down, make your own schedule. You didn't have a boss.
Yeah.
And you also had to, be your own risk manager. So if things started to go awry, whether it was a public thing or a private thing, you had to figure out, like, what am I going to do here?
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you've seen and the market and, buying a index fund and the success of index funds. So what has you saying, hey, I want to go do this on my own. I'm not going to go and do that. How do you see those choices?
Yeah. A lot of people say this, that if you look back and say, well, if I just parked all my money in that index fund,
right,
I'd be pretty much where I am right now.
Right.
And you'd have a lot less stress and everything else. But it really wouldn't be as interesting.
Right.
And you wouldn't learn as much about different things than just being in that index fund.
Right.
And I think that, just buying like an S&P or a NASDAQ or a Canadian index fund and kind of, putting your feet up and, playing cards or playing golf, it wasn't that interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to read about research, learn about other asset classes, meet people, talk to people about what they were doing, and then invest alongside them and with them.
Yeah.
So one of the guys that I met when I was over in Asia, we overlapped at Goldman, really nice guy. He started a self-storage business.
Okay.
And that's one of the, things that we've invested in quite a lot is self-storage and recreational vehicle parks and recreational vehicle parking.
Right.
And that's a really interesting asset class.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at self-storage and you're thinking, well, self-storage, okay, yeah, everyone seems to need it, have it, but it doesn't sound that exciting. But it's one of the best performing real estate asset classes of all over the last 20, 30 years. So it's a really interesting asset class, but it's also incredibly difficult to do and to do well.
Right.
And these guys have done a great job.
So you're investing in his business?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he started off doing small projects,
Right.
where it was kind of like a club deal, where me, a couple of other friends invested in a self-storage facility.
Right.
Then he got more people involved. Then he built the funds bigger. Now he's managing about 500 million.
Okay.
So he's done very well.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's within a 10-year period.
Yeah.
Very smart guy out of Calgary.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding. And by the way, I'm not surprised that you said that about, the index fund. It's life's not just about the result, right? It's just, and the reality is that you already have great results, right? So it's like, what am I going to do with my life? How am I going to spend my life? Who am I going to spend it with?
And I think, investing too, if you're a curious person, investing is very exciting because you can go down a lot of different rabbit holes, whether it's, looking at, stocks, or whether it's looking at private equity or private debt. And there's all sorts of different permutations and combinations. I mean, one of the student painting alumni, Garth Friesen.
Yes.
Yeah. Super smart fixed income guy who specialized in structured credit.
Yeah.
Writes for Forbes now.
Yeah.
Is I think retired or semi-retired from
semi-retired
from his hedge fund. Garth and I talked about a few things here and there, and one of the things I got interested in a few years ago was CLOs, collateralized loan obligations, and I was kind of looking through things, and I thought, wow, Garth probably knows about this. So I gave him a call and we talked about it, and he gave me some ideas, and I did a bunch of reading and got super interested in it. And then I listened to some podcasts, and now that's a sort of a channel that I'm investing in and I really like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I never would have known about it if I hadn't really talked to Garth about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No. And so, one of the things that I always love to do on our podcasts and conversations is kind of draw out, hey, this is what success looked like for Zack. Now, obviously, the world completely changes all the time, and those avenues are not available. They literally change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend for a young person, interested in finance, because and again, one of the things you've mentioned a lot is curiosity.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's really important. It's kind of a cliche, where, you listen to Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, some of these really, really smart guys, and you have to be interested in stuff. Yeah. Especially interested in, the things that you're going to be spending a lot of time doing.
Yeah.
I don't think when you're 20, you're going to figure out what your life's calling is, but I think you need to try lots of, or at least try a few things to see what it is you like or you're interested in. And it's really good to be curious about different things, because if you don't try something, you're not going to know.
Yeah.
And so I think, one of the things I talk to my daughters about, because they're, young and they're up and coming, is I think it's really important that people learn to be curious about things, ask lots of questions, but also I think kids today, with all the noise with social media and all these outside influences and distractions, which we didn't have as kids.
Yes.
It's really important for them to be able to focus and do deep work.
Yeah.
And I find that's so important now, is to be able to almost lock yourself in a room
Yeah.
and sit there for hours, just poring over one or two things and really learning something deeply.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you're at university and it's a business project, or it's a English play, Shakespeare, whatever it is, you need to have that ability to focus and really jump into something.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids these days just are, I see them.
Very difficult.
They're
Very,
scatterbrained. They're all over the place. They do not take the time.
Yeah.
And you're never going to learn something really well and get good at something if you can't do that really deep focus.
No, and I know we coach, turn your phone off, again, get all distractions out of your room, all these different types of ways, because again, and the phone's fantastic. Obviously you have a phone, you use the phone a lot, et cetera, but it's just, and this is where it limits us. So how do we manage it?
Yeah. And I think, so one of the, you got the curiosity, you got the ability to do kind of, deep focus project stuff. But also tied in with that, I think this is probably true of all businesses, is the ability of young people to build relationships with other people.
Yeah.
I can't tell you enough of how important that is, where you meet someone new or you meet a friend of a friend and you think, wow, that person's really interesting. I'd like to keep in touch with them. Yeah. A lot of people don't.
Yeah.
And they don't follow up and call that person. Yeah. Like, you're really good at that.
Yeah.
Is okay. I met that person. I make a note. I need to call them. I'm going to follow up and email them, or I'm going to call them, whatever. But kids now need to be able to not just network, but build relationships with people that they think are, positive influences or interesting people.
Yeah.
And not get subdued when they say no, or I don't want to talk to you, or I can't do a meeting. So that ability to build relationships. And then another thing that you taught me, which is be persistent.
Yeah.
Like, just keep going until someone says no.
Yeah.
I had a client, a really crazy client called Simon Long. He was brilliant, really smart guy. And I remember one day he said to me, listen, don't ever let up. He said, I will tell you when you're calling me too much, or you're giving me too much information, or something like that. Yeah. And it's very rare that someone says, Chris, stop.
Yeah.
That's too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Stop closing, or whatever.
Yeah.
Don't chase me. And I love also as well, like, I know one of the things that you have, and I wanted to point this out, is that you have you think highly of people, you accredit people, good traits. Like, that's something that you just naturally do. And so then that makes people attractive, because, hey, Zach thinks well of me, right? And then of course you're focused, especially on those people who, again, you're finding people interesting. And again, it's not like, oh, wow, I can make money from them or with them or whatever. It's no, Garth is really interesting. Dave's really interesting. You'd want to meet with them, so, and then obviously then there's you learn more, and you're more valuable to the community. You're more valuable to the economy.
And it's give and take too. If you're calling people up all the time and just getting information from them,
of course,
you need to, I think, have a little bit of two-way traffic where you can, share information, or have you seen this, or, talk about different things, so that they feel like you're kind of a productive, sort of, positive person to talk to.
For sure.
I think that definitely goes both ways. So I don't think it's enough to just, cold call someone and say, hey, can we talk? You need to have something that you're going to
looking to provide value.
Some kind of, focused discussion.
No,
at the beginning anyway.
No, for sure. I know Keith Ferrarzi, talks about never eat lunch alone, and he talks about always looking to provide value for people. That's really what networking is. How can I provide value? So before I'll ask my last question, any question that I should ask you before we jump to our last question?
Question?
No,
I don't know. I mean,
okay,
whatever you'd like to. Yeah.
No, good. Just if something you think I missed or anything. Yeah. So perfect. Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's considering joining StudentWorks?
I would say go for it. I mean, it's super challenging, exciting, but you'll learn a ton. I mean, the positive parts of the training, the interaction with other people that have similar, goals and interests as you, is very exciting. And it's just such a challenge. that you should do at a young age, because, you know, things are difficult, but one of the things that I found with it is you can get through it. And you got to have that challenge and that goal. And it'll kick your ass, but it's great. Because you're running your own business. A lot of people have never done it before. It's totally new, but there's big support network. There's lots of people to help you out if you're falling down or you're going astray, or, you know, or you're doing really well, you know.
Exactly.
It's a good thing for a young person who's got lots of energy and go. And it can seem really daunting, but I think it's so much more positive to me than just doing a traditional summer job where you're working for someone else and kind of punching a clock.
No.
Not that there's anything wrong with that,
of course,
but it's a real introduction to being a legit entrepreneur for the summer. And whether you like it or not.
Well, that's right.
Right? Yeah.
And again, I think also, you know, I know for you as well, if, you know, you think back and you've mentioned a number of the people who you knew in the program, again, it's who want to have a big career, who have lots of energy, who, again, want to put lots of energy into things. It's again, you know, they have a hard time stopping working is who we have, who we have in our program. But Zack, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Chris. It was good.
Just
good
awesome.
to see you again.
And great work.
Thank you.